Welcome. In this video, I would like to introduce some techniques that I use to acquire expert information using Google Scholar. Here I'm displaying the entry screen for Google Scholar, which is available on the web at scholar.google.com. Now, during semester breaks, I like to take on personal research projects, and I'll be picking up on one that I started last summer. After having lived in Europe for a few years, I became particularly interested in the architecture of the churches and the cathedrals that we visited. So here in Google Scholar, I'll be searching for Adobe PDF files that are related to medieval architecture, particularly related to churches, cathedrals, and religious sites. In the search box, I'm searching for the phrase medieval architecture. So I place that phrase inside double quotation marks. This prevents Google from searching just for the word medieval or just for the word architecture, but is searching specifically for the combination of the two words in the phrase medieval architecture. I've also executed a parenthetical search that adds additional qualification. So I'm looking for medieval architecture, but also with the words church or cathedral or religio asterisk. So religious, religion, religiosity. So one of those three words and the phrase medieval architecture are my search criterion. And then I further limited my search to find documents that are available as Adobe PDF files, because I don't want to be pointed to articles within databases or articles, particularly databases that are within university or private holdings that I won't have easy access to. I don't want to have to go to my university librarian and put in a document request. I'm looking to acquire the data right here on this computer using the public internet and then save those PDF files into my Zotero database. I have executed the search for medieval architecture and one of the three words, church, cathedral, or religio asterisk, in Google Scholar. And these are the results that I get today. Now, if you were to execute exactly the same search using Google Scholar, it's likely that you will get slightly different results because the corpus of available documents changes frequently. So in reading down these articles, the first one is Church Structure History in Europe, Cultural Historic Resources as a Factor of Entrance Tourism Development in Finland. Now, neither of those are particularly well-focused for my research interest, which is the architecture itself of religious buildings in Europe. But then I found the third article is Gothic Architecture and the Liturgy in Construction. Now that sounds kind of interesting. So I'm going to click the link for that file and take a look at it. I can see from here that it's a what we call in the United States a dissertation. In many other areas of the world, this is called a thesis written by a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Kent. But as I scroll down looking for the table of contents, I see that, all right, there's a section on contemporary habits of thought, networked computers and manuscripts. Okay, none of this is piquing my interest yet, but I do see a section on contemporary problems in Gothic architecture scholarship. That might be interesting because since I'm not an expert in this field of study, I don't know what the challenges are that scholars in this discipline have found. Chapter 2 addresses the scholarship related to the craft of masonry. Now that could be particularly interesting. I'm not a mason. I don't know that I could even make a freestanding brick wall myself, but it would be nice to understand the process of masonry and what do experts have to say about that trade. So because this is a PDF file, I'm able to use the hyperlinks that are in the table of contents and jump directly into specific areas of the paper. As I scan this, I'm observing that there is information here that's new to me, and it might be interesting to read. I think this is an article that I might want to save into my Zotero database so I have access to it at a later date. So using the Save to Zotero button that I have built into my Firefox browser, I can click a link, have this PDF file and its relevant bibliographic information stored in my Zotero database, and it'll be there for me when I go back to read more of this paper. In the meantime, I'm going to return to Google Scholar and search for more information. Back in the Google Scholar search results, I'll continue reading down the files that were found. The next one is the diagonal grid as a design method in the Armenian medieval architecture. Now this rings a bell for me. Last summer when I started on this research project, a number of architects that had been evaluating medieval architecture described a process of using diagonals as a means of creating symmetry within European cathedrals. I didn't quite understand the technical details of the architect's arguments, but I remember thinking to myself, this is something that I should put in the back of my mind and remember to research in the future. And of course, because I didn't write that down, I forgot. But now it's back in my mind, and I've pulled out my pencil and paper, and I made a note to myself to look for further articles that address the use of diagonals in architectural design. In the meantime, I'll open this PDF file and see if it's something that has information that's of use to me. So it dates back, it's copyright 2019, so it's still relatively new. And I'm just scanning through the abstract to see if there are any words that jump out at me to indicate that this document might be of interest. And it does. Here I'm seeing principal lines of the planning, part of a uniform diagonal grid. Now that's ringing a bell for me. So I'm going to save this document also into Zotero so I can read it later. Go back to Google Scholar. As I'm reading down, here's an article typed, Religious Tourism versus Secular Pilgrimage, the Basilica of La Sagrada Familia, which is in Barcelona. By the way, if you ever have a chance to visit Barcelona, Spain, I highly recommend spending the money to take a tour of La Sagrada Familia. It was one of the cathedrals that most stands out in my mind as a site of interest in Europe. So this looks like it's a proceedings from a conference, possibly. Interesting. I think I'll save this. I'd like to read this in a little more detail later. So again, I'm putting it into Zotero. And then I continue down and I get to a book on the tradition and identity, the architecture of Greek churches in Cyprus. Quite honestly, I don't have time to read a book right now. I'm looking more for papers that help me gain a broad overview. Here's an article on the architecture of light case study in Holy Cross Church in Nin, Croatia. Yeah, I'll click that, save it into Zotero. The reason I'm so quick to save these files into Zotero is I can always delete them later. But because I'm starting on a research process, I want to collect as much broad information as I can, looking for patterns in what the experts argue. For example, the use of diagonals in architectural design. And if it turns out that I have a paper here that in my Zotero database that isn't of value to me, I can just delete it. Or quite honestly, I'm a little bit of a data pack rat. Rather than deleting it, I will move it into another collection in Zotero, because you never know. 10 years from now, maybe I'll have an interest in the topic addressed in those papers. Here in Zotero, you can see that a few of the documents that I recently collected in Google Scholar search have been saved. I've edited these slightly to correct any typographical errors in the spelling or the capitalization of titles. And I have the PDF files stored locally here on my computer. I've returned again to Google Scholar because I want to show you one more trick that may help you find the most recent information about your topic of interest. So, just to remind you, I'm searching for the phrase medieval architecture, so I placed that within double quotation marks, along with any one of the following three words: church, or cathedral, or any word beginning with religio, religiosity, religion. And I've limited the search within Google Scholar to just those files that end in the .pdf file extension, meaning they're Adobe PDF files. And I do that using the operation file type, colon, and then the name of the extension that I'm searching for. So if I wish to search for just Microsoft Word documents, I could change the file type to DOC or DOCX. If I were looking for Microsoft Excel files, .xls or .xlsx. But I want Adobe PDF files. So I searched for file type :PDF. But here's my last tip. I want to find articles written just in the last 2 years, so I get a feel for the most current state of knowledge within this discipline. So I search a custom range of the year 2020 to the year 2022, and you notice that the search list, or the results list, changed slightly. A few items were removed from the list, indicating that the remaining articles were published within the period 2020 until 2022. For right now, that's the last 2 years. I hope you found this introduction to the use of Google Scholar helpful. If you have access to commercial databases through your institution library, you may find that they offer more granular control over your search functions. However, Google Scholar can be a useful adjunct in searching for information, and it may be the only opportunity for finding expert information in the expert literature for people who are not working at or enrolled in a university course. In any regard, I hope that this overview of Google Scholar helps you, and I wish you the absolute best of both academic research and academic writing.